Hi everyone, welcome back to Stories Told by Us. I'm Mariana.
My name is Ron.
And this is episode 5, The Beaumont Children. Okay, so we are moving into one of my favourite categories of storytelling, and this is true crime. And this particular story is one that has had me intrigued. I've listened to it on several different podcasts, so you may have heard it before. It's quite a known story that happened here in Australia, on Australia Day to be precise, back in 1966. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get started. So I do have notes, by the way, sorry, but I've got a lot of notes. I'll be looking down every now and again to gather my thoughts. So let's start. So this is based in Adelaide, which is one of the states of Australia, in 1966, and this particular case took place on Australia Day, which is the 26th of January. Nancy and Jim Beaumont married in 1955. Jim used to be a taxi driver, and then at the time of this crime, I guess we're going to call it, he was a travelling linen salesman. So he quite often was on the road selling linen, which I know back in the 60s and 70s it was quite, a lot of people were salesmen, weren't they? They used to go to the door and sell like books and knives and vacuum cleaners. And
That would have been a sheet job.
Hilarious. A sheet job, thank you. Nancy was a homemaker, so stay-at-home mum to their 3 children. So their 3 children were called Jane, Anna, and Grant. Now, Anna is like Anna, but Nancy decided that Anna was too common and boring, so she put an R in there, and they had Arna.
Arna. Oh.
Yeah, Arna with an R.
R.
Yes. So Grant was the youngest of the 3 Beaumont children. He was 4 years old. He was quite known as quite a bright little boy, very, very fond of his 2 older sisters. Then we had Anna, who was 7. Anna was probably the most playful and affectionate of the Beaumont children. And then we had Jane. Jane was 9, so the oldest of the children. She was known as a very studious, bright student in school, very responsible, quite mature for her age. She was a girl guide, and she was the quietest Beaumont child, so quite a shy girl, but very, very responsible, and basically like the Grant and Anna's second mum, so very motherly type of girl.
So they seem like a very nice family so far.
Yes, so lovely family, lovely children, and they lived in a lovely neighbourhood of Somerton in Adelaide. Now, for those of you who are a bit of crime junkies, you may have heard of the Somerton Man, which took place back in 1948, where a man was found dead on Glenelg Beach, and no one ever discovered who he was. So that's just a whole other story. Yes. So let's talk a little bit about Australia back in 1966. So there was a brand new Prime Minister. Harold Holt was a new Prime Minister. He seemed like he was going to do a great job at being the Prime Minister. He was looking at breaking down the white Australian policy, which I'm not going to get into right now, but it was a law to do with immigrants coming to Australia. And at the same time, Australia being under the monarchy, so being under the Queen, they used to have pounds, just like they do in the UK, but the Australian dollar was about to come into effect. So times were changing, things were happening in Australia. The nation was getting, new things were happening in Australia. So it was quite a buzzing period of time. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, just to add another fact in, Harold Holt actually disappeared after he'd been Prime Minister for about roughly 2 years, and he was swimming in the ocean and was never seen again.
What?
Yeah, I never knew that. So one of our Prime Ministers was just vanished.
Just vanished?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I didn't look times in Australia.
Yeah, I didn't look into that too much. So if maybe they found him one day, sorry if I'm giving you misleading information, but he did disappear in the ocean.
Okay.
So there you go. So a little bit about Somerton. So Somerton in Adelaide was considered to be a really, really safe place. Loads of families, lovely sort of family-friendly neighbourhood. Kids were always out and about playing. Now, very different to the times now, but back then in the 60s, it was actually really common for kids to just be on the streets on their own without adult supervision. And they used to come home usually when like the street light lamps would go on was an indication for the kids to come home. So really normal for kids to be out and about
Yeah. Okay.
all the time.
I remember me growing up being out.
In the 60s?
No, in the 60s.
Geez, you look pretty good for someone who was a child in the 60s.
That's true. I must rise.
Anyway, back to Somerton. So the Beaumont family lived 5 minutes away from Glenelg Beach. Now, Glenelg Beach was a really popular destination. For those of you who don't know much about Australia in the summer gets really warm, doesn't it? So we get to temperatures of about 40 degrees, which I think is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I hope that's not totally wrong. But, it's really common for us, and especially if you live on the coast, like we live not in Adelaide, but we do live on the coast, and you do quite often in summer, people, most of their time they spend at the beach. Really common, really normal. Now, this worries me a little bit, but like I said before, times were very different back in the 60s, and children quite often were allowed to wander all over the place on their own. Now, the eldest daughter, Jane, remember she was only 9. So these kids are 9, 7, and 4, and they were actually allowed to go to the beach without their parents.
Yeah, okay,
that to me is really scary, especially for a 4-year-old. That to me is just a baby going to the beach on their own. But back then, it was quite a common occurrence. And interestingly enough, after this case happened, it actually changed the way that a lot of parents parented their children. So,
okay.
Yeah, so we'll get into that a little bit later. But basically, so we've got a picture of this family. So we've got the mum and dad, 3 children, all happy, healthy, normal, everyday, typical Australian family. Okay, so just the day, so this incident happened on the 26th of January, like I said, Australia Day, but let's just go rewind to 2 nights before, just to give you a little bit of an insight of what Jane was like, because Jane was left to look after her two children, look after her brother and sister, like I said, when they used to go to the beach on their own. So this is a letter that Jane wrote to her parents while she was babysitting. So Nancy and Jim went out on a date night and left the 3 children at home under the care of Jane. So this is a story just to see what Jane is like. So, dear Mum and Dad, I am just about to go to bed. The time is 9. I put Grant's nappy on, so there is no need to worry about his wetting the sheets. Grant wanted to sleep in his own bed, so one of you will have to sleep with Anna. Good night to you both, Jane. Kiss, kiss, kiss. P.S. I hope you had a nice time, wherever you went. P.P.S. I hope you don't mind me taking your radio into my room, Daddy.
Well, very nice.
So she sounds like a really lovely girl. She's really responsible.
Very mature for her age.
Very mature. Like, we've got a 9-year-old son, and there is no way in hell.
He wouldn't be looking after anything. He'll be playing Fortnite all day.
He'll be playing Fortnite.
Forgetting to eat.
Raging on some video game, and that'll be that. So yeah, she does sound like a very responsible, almost like I said, like another mother figure to her younger siblings. Okay?
Yeah.
So on January 25th, Jim was due to go on one of his sales trips, but before he went, he decided to spend a little time with his children. So what he did was he took Jane, Grant, and Anna down to Glenelg Beach, which was a 5-minute drive away, and they basically took them down to the beach and said, you can have like an hour or so here to play. They asked him if he was going to be back to pick them up, and he said no, he was off to a trip away from the state, so they had to catch the bus home. So he made sure that Jane knew exactly where the bus was, and she did. She said exactly what time the bus would be there and exactly on what street and how they would walk to the bus stop. So like I said, super responsible, knew exactly what she needed to do. Jim reminded Jane that Anna and Grant were not good swimmers, so she would have to be watching them at all times, and Jane assured Jim that she would make sure that they would only swim in the shallows. Okay?
Okay.
That day goes without incident. They play at the beach. Jim actually sits in the car and watches them for half an hour without them knowing. And then when he's sort of feeling, yep, they've had a good time, everything's good, he left. So I still cannot imagine leaving my 9, 7, and 4-year-old children at the beach on their own. That just petrifies me, especially not just because of the possibility of strangers, but more so the beach. Like, we do have, really strong currents in Australia. And, oh, my God, no, anything could happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Very scary.
Scary.
Really super scary. But anyway, so that was January 25th. Jim goes off on his sales trip, and on January 26th, it's a beautiful, hot summer's day, Australia Day, like I said, and Jane, Grant, and Anna really, really want to go down to the beach again. So they start nagging their mum, Nancy, please can we go to the beach? And finally she gives in. She says to them that they will catch the bus to and from the beach, so she wasn't going to go with them. They got dressed into their bathers, and you're trying not to yawn, aren't you? Oh, my God, this must be so boring.
No. I'm actually really interested. You've told me this story before, but like always, I don't listen to you, so it's like I'm hearing it all over again.
For the first time. It is quite late at night.
Yeah.
Not really, sort of. Anyway, so what happens is they put their bathers on, they put clothes on top of their bathers, and they carry their thingamajigs. What are they called to dry yourself? A towel. That's it. They've got their towels. And
that's a tricky word.
Yeah. So they've got their towels, and they put it into like a green bag that Nancy gives them. Along with that, Jane is an avid reader, and her favourite book is Little Women. So she has a very used copy of Little Women that she's got in her hand. Along with that, Nancy gives them money enough for a return trip on the bus, and then whatever's spare they can use at the bakery to buy themselves some lunch. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
To be exact, she gives them 8 pence and 6 shillings. So remembering that we're not quite with the Australian dollar yet, so we're still using the UK currency. So that gives them enough for a round trip, like I said, and just a little bit extra to buy something at the bakery, like probably like a pastry each or something
like a sausage
that.
roll.
Yeah, no, not even that.
Ah.
So it wasn't enough for that. We'll get to that. Don't ruin it.
So I want a sausage roll.
So they're ready to go. Nancy makes sure that that Jane knows exactly, again, to make sure that she's looking after her brother and sister, to make sure that she goes to Glenelg Beach, doesn't talk to any strangers, and comes right back. Now, they were told to get back on the midday bus. They got onto the 10 a.m. bus. They were going to be there for a couple hours, and they were going to get back on the midday bus, which would have brought them back home literally about 10 past 12.
Okay.
Okay, so Nancy actually goes out to a friend's place while they're at the beach, and then just before midday she says bye to a friend and says, I'm going to head back. The kids are due back home. I want to be there when they arrive at the bus stop. Okay?
Okay.
So there you go. So they go off to the beach. Nancy gets home just before midday, goes into the house expecting them to either be there or be due basically within 5 minutes. Nothing happened. Okay, so she thinks, okay, they're probably just having a really great time. I'm sure they're going to get on to the 1 o'clock bus, so it's all good. I'll wait till then. So the 1 o'clock comes around, still no children. 2 o'clock comes around, still no children. Now, me personally, I reckon at midday, if they hadn't come back, I would be going to the beach, which is 5 minutes away, and looking for them. But I think in a time like that, you just, as a parent, you don't want to get yourself worked up and worried. I mean, you go either 2 ways. You either really super stressed out, oh my God, and rush there, or you're like, no, everything's great. I'm sure they're just having a really good time. They've missed the bus. They're going to be back any minute. All is well, which is the way that Nancy kind of went. She was worried, but she just had so much faith in Jane being such a responsible, mature young girl that she was sure that they would be back.
Yeah. You also go through the stages, I think. You go from being worried and to being angry because why are they not here yet? And then you start Freaking out. That's what I would do.
Yeah, absolutely. So luckily, Jim actually, who wasn't due back for a few days, actually came back because the sales of wherever it was that he went to weren't going well. So he actually came back
Oh, so he had
that
sheet
same
time.
day. He had a sheet time. So he came back that same day. Now he walks into the house and Nancy is freaking out. So by this time, I think it was about 3 o'clock, and she is, oh my God, the kids went to the beach. They were meant to be back on the midday bus. They haven't been back. What do? We need to go find them. So they go directly to the beach and they start searching for them. Now, remember, it's Australia Day. The beach has been packed all day. Okay, loads and loads of people all out to have a great time for Australia Day. And that is something that we do quite often in Australia Day. Being January, it's like middle of summer. We quite often head down to the beach, or you head down to a park and have a barbecue, things like that. So there was a reserve right next to the beach, like again a lot of beaches have. We've got like a grassy reserve nearby.
Yeah.
So Collie Reserve was also full of people. So they spend a bit of time walking around looking for kids. With no luck, they go straight to the police. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they go to the police, and basically the police take this seriously immediately, and they get straight onto it, and the hunt begins for the Beaumont children. So Nancy, she stays at home. She actually has to be sedated because she can't handle the nerves and the fear of something having gone terribly wrong. And so she stays home while Jim starts searching with the police. So they start like a manhunt around. Pretty like straight away as well, they have a news report. Now back then, most people had at least one television in the house. It's still a bit of a novelty, but they certainly had the radio. And it was broadcasted both on the television and on the radio. Breaking story, the Beaumont children, Jane, Anna and Grant have gone missing at Glenelg Beach, blah, blah, blah. So most people in the town, at least in Somerton, are aware. So everyone is starting to look around, start searching. Now, Jim, like I said, he used to be a taxi driver, so he actually gets about 40 of his friends to start driving around the town also on the lookout. So big deal. Everyone's out searching. A few days after the kids have gone missing, they actually released that letter that I read earlier, written by Jane to the press. And the reason why they do it is they just really want everyone to empathize with Nancy and Jim, and to see that, they're beautiful children, and like we really need searching for them. So it was a bit of a ploy to get as many people on board as possible, which is what you want anyway.
Makes sense to do that.
Absolutely. So, and we know we know now within the first 48 hours is like super important to find it. And luckily for them, because in a lot of cases I've heard of this doesn't happen, the police were on board immediately as soon as Jim went to the police station that very same day. They started searching. So after a bit of investigation, this is what we know. These are the facts. The Beaumont children leave home at 10 a.m. on the bus. They go to Glenelg Beach, which is 5 minutes away, and they were meant to take the midday bus home. They were given 8 pence and 6 shillings, enough for a bus fare and for a treat at the bakery.
Mm-hmm.
Jim was away on business, and luckily he came home that very same day. So as you can imagine, the police start trying to find witnesses, anyone who was on the beach, anyone who was at Collie Reserve, anyone who was on the bus. They want to get as much information as possible about what could have happened to these kids, because there is no trace of them. They don't find their towels or the bag they took or Jane's book anywhere on the beach. There's just like nothing. So they managed to speak to the bus driver, who remembers them getting onto the bus. So that's the first good sign. Okay, they got on the bus at 10 a.m. There was also a passenger on the bus who recalls exactly the same thing, recalls the kids coming on. Everyone did say they found it a bit strange that they weren't with an adult, but they did say that the kids appeared really confident and knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't appear scared or nervous or anything like that. It's like they'd done this all the time. So that really eased people's minds. So they spoke to the bus driver, like I said. A passenger also remembers them getting off at Mosley Street. Now, Mosley Street was just near Glenelg Beach, but no one saw them board a bus either at 12 or 1 or 2 or anything thereafter.
To go back home.
To go back home. Yeah.
Okay.
So only people saw them go, no one coming back home. At 1:45 p.m., supposedly, Tom Patterson, who was the local postie, or that's what we call it, postie. So the
Postman.
Postman. Yep. Sorry, postman. Now he saw them on Jetty Street. Now he knows a lot of the people in the town. He knows the Beaumont children well, but he was quite old and his memory was a little bit fleeting. So they completely believe that he saw the kids, but he said that he saw them towards the end of his shift, which actually was meant to be around like later on the afternoon. But he said that he saw them at 1:45 and his shift only just started at 1. So the details there were really shifty. So they, like I said, he probably did see them, but they thought that perhaps he saw them in the morning before he started his rounds. Who knows? But again, it's good. There's a witness that saw them.
Yeah.
Then there was another elderly couple that saw them playing at the Collie Reserve in the sprinklers.
Okay.
So the sprinklers were on. They were all playing, having a ball. Now, from there, you could see the beach, and there was an elderly couple just sitting down on a bench, and one of the elderly man basically said, "Oh, we've been here for ages. It's hot. I want to go home." And his wife said, "Don't be ridiculous. It's Australia Day. We're going to sit here and we're going to enjoy ourselves. Just have a look at those 3 children having a blast playing down there." Okay. So there was more witnesses. They're just watching them play in the water. Everything's fine. The husband pointed out that it was a bit unusual. They looked quite young to be without a parent. And then the wife said, "No, don't be ridiculous. Look at that man there. He's been watching them the whole time. Surely he is their father." Okay, so now we know that Jim Beaumont was not there. So this man seen watching them definitely was not their father. So this is the lead that basically ran throughout this case. So this man, the lady recalled that he was laying down. He was in his mid-30s. He had like either blonde or light brown hair, and he had quite a gaunt face. He was quite thin, and he wore a blue bathing suit. He was laying on his towel, intensively watching the Beaumont children for a long period of time, which is why they thought perhaps he was the father.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So, so then that's already, and actually there was more than just, they weren't the only witnesses. There were several witnesses that saw this man with the Beaumont children and watching the Beaumont children.
So, with the children as
yes, so I'll get into that in a moment. So also a school friend saw Jane, but didn't speak to her. But this school friend also said that they weren't alone. They were with a man, a grown up that looked like he was in his 30s. Okay, so dodgy. So basically, another thing that this couple saw, they were watching this man quite intensively, so much so that he came over to speak to them. And what was interesting was he actually said, "Have you seen anyone spying on myself and my children?" So he said that it was his kids. Or actually, I don't think he said it was kids, but I think the lady said, "Oh, it looks like you and your children are having a great time," and he was like, "Yes, we are." So he didn't deny that he wasn't. He didn't say he wasn't the father. Then he asked if he had seen someone spying on them. Now they said, "No, we haven't seen anyone." And the gentleman that was sitting there said, "Oh, my eyesight's not the best, so no, I've not seen anything." And he said, "Oh, because some of my money has gone missing." And I was just wondering if you'd seen anyone take. So I wonder if perhaps he, saw them watching him, and so he kind of went over there to assure them that he was their father or whatever. Maybe he was feeling nervous. Who knows why he did that.
Make him think there was nothing to worry about.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a nice guy.
Or even just to see if anyone had been watching them or anything like that, just to cover his tracks, I guess, to make sure everything's okay. So Another thing that the couple saw is after a while of them playing, he was watching them the whole time, and then he actually stood up and started playing with them, and they were flicking their towels on him, like a bit of a game, you flick your towels on each other. So it really did look to everyone that saw them that this man was not a stranger, that he knew them and they knew him well and they were comfortable with him. So I guess that would lead people to believe that perhaps it was a relative or a friend of the family or something like that. But in later interviews with Nancy and Jim, they were adamant that it was definitely not a relative, perhaps that they didn't have relatives there at the time or whatever, and there was no sort of family, friends or anyone that close to them that fit that description. So they are positive that this person was a stranger, or perhaps they met them before, met before at the beach, and they've sort of developed a rapport or a relationship with this man, but it was certainly not anyone that they could pinpoint that they knew.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask. I didn't want to jump the gun, but maybe they had already spoken to this man before, if they had gone to the beach by themselves.
Yeah, well, all the witnesses said that they seemed really comfortable with this man. Okay, so there you go. I mean, for them to think that, or this couple to think that he was their father because he's playing with them and stuff, then
Yeah.
Yep. Another thing that that the couple claimed that they saw was after a while, after playing, he actually began dressing the kids. So after they were finished in the water, he started dressing them, including dressing Jane. Now, later on, when Nancy was told this, she was really shocked by this. Now, remember I said at the beginning, Jane was a real shy, timid girl. Nancy was adamant that she would never let anyone dress her. Now, she's 9 years old. A 9-year-old dresses themselves. Okay?
Yeah.
And certainly she said not only does she dress herself, but she would never let a stranger dress her. So this is starting to sound a little bit it's not innocent anymore. Obviously, this man, well, maybe this man has a different agenda or who knows, but why is he dressing 3 unknown children? Not okay.
Not okay.
Not all right at all. Okay, so let's keep going with what else happened that day. So as I said before, do you remember I told you that Nancy gave them some money so they could, if they had any left change from the bus, they could buy something at the bakery?
Yeah, sausage roll.
Yeah. Yes, not a sausage roll.
Okay.
So basically this was a regular occurrence for them. So quite often when they went to the beach, if their mum had given them any extra money, they would go. So the people at the bakery knew the Beaumont Children, but they usually would go and just buy like a pastry, like a little treat, which was a lot cheaper than some of the other items at the bakery. So that particular day, between 11:45 and 12:15, they went to the bakery. This was called the Wenzel Bakery. And they actually, they got a couple of things, but then they also ordered a meat pie.
Oh.
Now, a meat pie is not something they'd ever ordered before, and a meat pie was actually one of the bigger ticket items, so it was more expensive. So the baker, or sorry, not the baker, but the person working at the bakery thought it was quite odd that they ordered it in the first place. But then Jane produced a £1 note.
Oh, rich.
Well, not rich. She never got given a £1 note from her mother. So where did this £1 note come from? So basically it was assumed by this, first of all, someone had given her the money. And second of all, because she was also buying a meat pie, potentially she'd been given money to buy someone else something, and then they probably said, here you go, take this, buy me a meat pie and buy yourselves something as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so this just continues on with the theory that they're potentially hanging out with this man, this mystery man. Okay, so, as soon as that was obviously found out, again, Nancy straight away said that she didn't give them a £1 note. She told them exactly what she had given them. So here we go. Here's another mystery. So by the sounds of it so far, what I am thinking is this man has got something to do with this, right?
Yeah.
Like 100%. Whoever this guy is, he's obviously met them before, or he's just really great at
making friends.
Yeah, like he must be a super friendly guy. So for whatever reason, these children trust this man, which generally would lead you to believe that they've met him before. Now, just flicking back to like a week or so before this incident, surprisingly enough, Nancy brought this up, with all the investigation, that when they had come home from the beach at another time, Anna was actually joking around and saying, Jane has a boyfriend down at the beach.
Oh, okay.
And now it's funny because Nancy didn't push it. She just thought, Anna's just being like joking around or whatever, and Jane had just sort of brushed it off. But what if this man was speaking to them? And this is the man that Anna meant by saying Jane has a boyfriend. What we know about Jane being quite a shy girl, everyone is adamant throughout this entire investigation, especially Jim and Nancy, saying that she would never have gone off with a stranger or spoken to a stranger. So, yeah, so there you go. Interestingly, though, as well, another thing that most people are pretty sure of is that if for whatever reason Grant and Anna had been, I guess, gullible enough to follow someone or to be taken by someone, everyone's sure that Jane would have gone along just to protect them.
Okay.
So that's another scenario that perhaps something, they got led somewhere or taken somewhere, and she went out of just to protect them, basically, to keep them safe. So that's another thing that could have happened. Okay, so the police hired a sketch artist. Like I said, there was a few witnesses that saw this man, so they thought the best thing to do is get a sketch artist, get this image out into the newspapers and broadcast it on television as soon as possible. They need to move fast.
Yeah.
Okay, who is this man? So they get a sketch artist in. Now, they had one sketch artist that worked for the newspaper that was kind of the town sketch artist. So it's the same guy that does the sketches all the time. Unfortunately, on that day, again, remember, it's Australia Day, which would be a public holiday here. He was drunk.
Oh.
So he had spent most of the afternoon drinking. The seriousness of the situation kind of pushed him to sober up quite quickly, but he was really struggling. So they had one of the witnesses, a lady, explain again about this man. So again, he was in his mid-30s, white man, blonde or light brown hair, had quite a thin, gaunt face, and he was wearing a blue bathing suit. So this is what we know. So I guess, unfortunately, the image was not the best image that it could have been, potentially. It wasn't a great image, but they needed to get something out there. So they just did what they could, got what they needed, and popped it out into the media. On January 29th, so 3 days later after the disappearance, there was a newspaper article in the Sunday Mail, front page, and the title was Sex Crime Now Feared. So immediately after the witnesses saying that they saw this man dress the children, it's automatically turned into potential sex crime, that this man is a pedophile or something like that, and he's taken the children. And then there was, all the speculation started. They're dead. They've been kidnapped. Who knows? Which is really would have been awful. And this happens all the time, though. Let's be honest. Whenever there's a crime, people speculate because no one knows what the answer is. Nancy and Jim have been really, really cooperative through this entire thing. So anything the police want them to do, anything that they ask, they are right there, trying to give as much information as they can, and trying to help in the investigation, however they can. So actually it was interesting because I did at one point think, I wonder if anyone ever speculated if it was them, but never in all the years of investigation did anyone ever suspect Nancy and Jim. Like I said, because they were always on board with everything, that anything the police wanted to do, they did. So no one ever thought it was them, basically. I think really the only scrutiny that they came under was the fact that Nancy let the 3 young children go to the beach on their own. But again, loads of people did this. So, and like I said, as soon as this happened, actually, there was a massive shift in Australia, and it was a lot less young children were seen unsupervised. So parents weren't as trusting as they were. And there was certainly a lot more sort of paranoia going around in the country, and kids didn't have those really free liberties that they had. So things did change because of this crime. So basically this was a massive police search. It was one of the biggest police searches that Australia had ever seen, and it was all hands on deck. They were covering not just Somerton, but beyond, all the towns all around in Adelaide, searching, because they thought it would be really difficult for this man, if he had kidnapped the children, to take them without any witnesses. Now remember, this was on all the TV, this was on the news, this was on all the newspapers, and it was on the radio. So people are on the lookout for these children. You know, their picture is plastered everywhere. So they did find it really hard to believe that anyone could get away with sort of smuggling these kids, or smuggling, but kidnapping these children without anyone. Okay? So basically, on January 31st, Jim appeared on national television with a plea to please bring his children home, and that if, for whatever reason, Jane, Anna, and Grant saw this, you know, can they try to make contact with their family, however possible, so, which was, you know, pulled on the heartstrings of everyone. So they had hundreds of calls of tips coming through, and the police really tried to investigate and follow up on each one of those tips. So it was a massive hunt. A $500 reward was posted. Now, even back then, you would think, well, $500 is a lot, but it actually, for a ransom, for a reward for 3 missing children, actually it wasn't that much. So that sort of came under scrutiny as well, that it wasn't a huge reward. But Jim got a really massive following, and all the community chipped in, and they managed to raise $10,000 reward. So that's a lot more of an appealing reward. And as you can imagine, all these calls came in with witnesses and all sorts. And as with many cases, probably a lot of it was like a scam or hoaxes or whatever, or people just clutching at straws, just trying to get a lead on where these children may be. So a few things happen in the following years. Lots of people, obviously, that they continually investigated, so it didn't become a cold case. I think it was probably a few years before it became a cold case. But amongst the different sort of strategies that they came up with was there was a very rich man in the area called Con Politi. Now, he actually found out about a celebrity psychic. So there was a celebrity psychic in Europe called Gerard Crozier. Now, he had been on television, and he'd been in newspapers, having assisted in unsolved crimes.
Okay.
And he'd had lots of wins with finding out information about certain cases. So a friend of the family actually spoke to them and put towards them, how about we get this guy over, and maybe it will work. Now, Nancy and Jim were Catholic, and they did not believe in this at all. Jim was quite skeptical, but Nancy, I think she sort of thought, you know, there's no harm in trying. She preferred to try something rather than nothing and just sit back and not have her children. So what they did was, though, they didn't pay for him to come over or anything, but he apparently quite often worked off-site, so not at where the cases were. So all they needed to do, not all they need to do, but they needed to pay for a helicopter to go over the area of where the children had disappeared from, and take some like photographs and send those photographs to Crozier so he could do his psychic medium thing.
Okay.
So the Beaumonts didn't pay for this, but their friend and other people sort of put money in for it, including this Con Politi, and they sent it over to Crozier. So he, from wherever he was, had a look at these pictures, and he basically said to them that he feels that they have been buried alive. The first place that they thought that he said that they were buried alive was in a drain pipe. I guess it wasn't such a far-fetched idea that children playing, you know, perhaps went and had a look, you know, and thought, oh, let's go down here and check it out. So not completely so far-fetched. So they did do a hunt of the area and of this drain pipe, and they came up with nothing. He actually 3 times that there were 3 occasions where he said that they were buried alive, but each time it was in a different place, but he was always adamant that they were buried alive. He did this from wherever he lived, and then he actually flew over to Adelaide and he came over to do the investigation for himself.
Okay.
The media obviously was like straight onto it. It was like a media circus, and a national scandal of him coming over. And basically, again, he went to some old warehouse. Sorry, it was a site where apartment buildings were built, and he said that they were buried alive there.
Okay.
So yeah, who knows? But they decided not to check out that area at that time because he said that there was some apartments that had just been built. He said they were buried underneath there, so they're not going to break down a brand new apartment block to have a look to see if they're buried under. That wasn't feasible enough. So after all of this happened, basically the Beaumonts tried to get back to their normal life as much of. I mean, they've just lost 3 children. Like, that's their whole world. That's devastating. So they try to go back to their normal life. Jim wants to move out of the family home, but Nancy says no because she doesn't want them, if they one day return, she's obviously still got hope that they're going to come back one day. If one day they return, the last thing she wants is for the children to come home and see that their parents have moved on. Yeah. So they actually stay in that house and they stay there for very many years afterwards. 2 years later, in 1968, a first sort of big lead hits. And what happens is they receive a letter signed by Jane.
Oh.
Now, this letter basically tells them that they're okay, that they're being treated okay, and that they are living with someone only referred to as the man.
Okay.
So no names, nothing like that. And the letter says, like we went to watch The Sound of Music yesterday and little Grant fell asleep, and it's just like this telling us, what they're doing. In this letter, Jane says that the man is willing to let her parents see them, as long as they do not tell the police or anyone else.
Okay.
Okay? Now, within this letter, there was some very strict instructions of what Jim had to wear and where he had to go. He had to drive a few hours away to the state of Victoria. Now, remember, they are in Adelaide, so they're crossing the border into Victoria, into a town called Dandenong, and they were going to meet at the post office there.
Okay.
At 8:50 a.m. On the morning of February 26, 1968. This is the first big lead that they have, okay? Now, of course, they're going to go and give it a go, but Jim does have his doubts because the handwriting is not exactly Jane's handwriting. Okay? It's similar, but it's not exactly right. Now, Nancy, obviously, in desperation, says it's been 2 years. Maybe she hasn't been allowed to write in all this time. She's older. Just trying to think of any excuse of why maybe perhaps the writing is different. The other thing that Jim makes him believe that it's not Jane is that Anna is spelled incorrectly.
Oh, okay.
Now, remember, Jane was 9 years old when she was taken. She she was an avid reader. She was reading Little Women, which is it's a massive book for a 9-year-old. So we can, she was a bright girl, knew how to read and write really well. It's very unlikely that she's going to forget how to spell her sister's name. Really unlikely. So 2 things that makes Jim think, I don't think this is the real deal, but you cannot let this one pass up.
Definitely not.
Okay? But what they do is after, thinking about it, they let the police know. Okay. So the police are like, right, okay, let's do it. Let's go. So they went with, I think it was 2 other officers. Super, hush hush. They didn't tell anyone else in the police, what is it called? Department. That's it. I'm thinking precinct, but we're not in America. I watch too much crime shows. So they tell the police and they go and they start their journey on February 25th to get there for February 26th at 8:50 a.m. in Dandenong post office. Now, along the way, Jim notices that a car had been following them for the majority of the way. It turns out not only 1 car, but 2 cars had been following, and it was the media. So somehow the media found out what had happened about the letter, and they were in hot pursuit to get the first story. So basically, when they arrived, the media came out. It was a disaster. Okay.
No.
Just before the media sort of came out and showed themselves that they were there and whatnot. They actually arrived at the post office early, and Jim stood outside waiting. Now, somebody rang the Dandenong post office and said, and told the lady who picked up the phone to go and let the man outside, which was Jim, let him know that they will be there soon.
Okay.
Now, this woman had no idea who was calling, didn't know anything about this, but she just did it. So she went out, she went to Jim and said they'll be here soon. You can only imagine the nerves and, oh my God, I don't even know what he would be feeling, Nancy would be feeling at this. She goes back in, and then there's another phone call and to another person that was working at the post office, and they went out and spoke to Jim also. And as you can imagine, because there was 2 police officers there, and then the media came out and they started asking questions, and that was the end. So no one came, no man, no children. And poor Jim waited out there for 3 days in hopes that
They will come
they
anyway.
would come.
Oh,
and
no.
Nothing happened. So basically, they went back to Somerton. They received 3 more letters. So some from the children and one from the man, and it basically was saying, well, you screwed up. You called the police, you told the media, you're never going to see them. So that was that. And then that was it. They didn't hear anything else from that. So basically they ruined their chances to get back. So that's that for a really long time. So, things popped up every now and again. Obviously the case went cold. Nancy and Jim never gave up hope that their children, as time went by, they did give up hope. I meant to say that their children, that was it. They believed their children were dead or that they would never see them again. Nancy and Jim divorce and sell the family home years later. And, they carry on with their lives, I guess. 24 years later, when forensics started progressing, the only evidence that they had from this was those letters that were sent. So they test the letters and they find fingerprints. And unfortunately, they find the prints belong to a man in Melbourne. They went and speak to him, he was cross-examined, and he admitted that was all a hoax.
Oh,
yeah, so back then he was a 17-year-old teenager, thought it would be a bit funny, and it was all him. So he was absolutely beyond, what do you call it? He felt terrible for what he had done. He was so remorseful, and, obviously Nancy and Jim were told. I think after 24 years, God, I don't know what you'd be thinking anyway, if that could have been a thing, or if you kind of in your heart knew that it was a joke or a hoax. I mean, Jim never believed that it was real in the first place, I guess. So that was that. So over time, more crimes took place, and specifically more crimes took place where children were taken. In 1973, Joanne Ratcliffe was at a sporting match in an oval, very crowded, loads of families, and she was playing with, she took a liking to a little 4-year-old girl, Kirsty, and they were playing together. Kirsty needed to go to the bathroom. Joanne said that she would take her, and they were never seen again.
Oh, no.
So similar circumstances, 2 young children taken from a crowded area where there's loads of families, and literally no trace of them ever
in the
again.
same area as well?
In Somerton. Yeah.
Somerton, okay.
So and there was other cases like this where children were taken. So along the way there were some suspects, some of which were convicted for these other crimes, and there were moments where they tried to link their cases that perhaps it was the same person that had taken the Beaumont children. They all were super dodgy guys, and it could have been, but the Beaumont case had zero evidence besides from those letters which turned out to be hoax. There was nothing because none of their items were ever recovered, and they had gone to the beach with such minimal amount of things, and they're at a beach, so it's not like really like you could even find footprints or anything. You're in a sand where there's loads of people. Like there was just nothing. They literally disappeared without a trace, which was really sad. So on April 30th, 1996, so we're jumping like big time. If you remember, I spoke about a Con Politi, which was a very rich guy. Yep. So he sort of decides to take things into his own hands, and he's like, you know what, I'm going to go with this where Crusade thought that they were buried. He hired a whole bunch of construction people, and he went for his life digging. 15 holes were dug around the warehouse that was one of the areas that were suspected to perhaps they had been buried alive. But after they tested samples of dirt and rubble, there was zero evidence of any human matter at all. So that was another failure. In June 1996, there was a dog trainer who had cadaver dogs that would find cadavers of, dead bodies, and they went on a search. Same thing, no deal. Nothing came up. The latest possibility of a suspect actually came about just 3 years ago, 2017. So going all the way forward, really, to 2017. So just 3 years ago, a diary popped up. Now, this diary was of a boy. Back then, he was a young boy called Andrew McIntyre. Now, Andrew McIntyre quite often used to go diving at Glenelg Beach with his dad. So his dad and another friend of his dad called Alan Anthony. Now, on January 26th, which was Australia Day, 1966, when the Beaumont children went missing, they were supposed to go diving at Glenelg Beach. But at the last minute, Andrew was told by his father and by Munro, the father's friend, to stay at home. Okay, and they supposedly went without him. When they got back that evening, they got back and there was all blood in the car. And Andrew's sister also testified later on that her father had come in with blood on his shirt.
Oh.
Okay, and she actually had said as well that there were 3 dead bodies in the car, but there was no evidence of that. Okay, so when they looked into this further, turns out that Munro, which was the friend, so the friend of the father, he actually was convicted as a child molester. Okay, in Australia. So he had been convicted of child molester, and after he carried out his sentence in jail, he actually moved to Cambodia, and he started up a bar of like ladyboys.
Okay.
And there he was also convicted of molesting 2 Cambodian young boys. So he does not have a good record. Now, when they were investigating a little bit further about him, one of the managers, or the manager of the bar that worked there for years with him, actually stated that he, was really remorseful and about things he had done in his past, and that's why he was trying to make himself a better person. Because while he was working at that bar in Cambodia, he actually quite often gave to lots of charities. So even though he then went on to do the wrong thing again and molest 2 young boys, at the same time, it was like he was desperately trying to make himself a better person. But like I said, this manager said that he had told him on many occasions to try to clean himself up because he didn't want to feel regret again. He had made mistakes 30 to 40 years ago.
Oh.
And the most interesting part of this story is that when you see the picture of Munro back in the 60s as a young man on Glenelg Beach, he was in his mid-30s. He had blonde, light brown hair, a gaunt face, and a blue bathing suit.
What happened?
Nothing.
Nothing.
That was it. There was nothing.
Well, that sucks.
So that is the story of the Beaumont children. One of the biggest mysteries that we've had here in Australia. All right, guys, thank you so much. Super long episode, but we hope to see you next week with episode 6. Have a great week.
Bye.